get into this other topic because there's been a whole lot of foolishness and craziness going on about Daniel 11, and some of you are probably thinking, oh, here we go again. However, I promise not to do that. And the reason there's a lot of craziness out there is because of a historical problem that God's people have had over and over again throughout history. Okay? Why did the disciples get tripped up when Christ was crucified?
They remembered his prophecies.
Because they did, they plugged their own personal opinions into it rather than taking the Word of God and what the Word of God said. Okay? The Millerites, why were they disappointed? Again, because they plugged their personal opinions into it rather than taking the Word of God.
It's misunderstanding.
Was God's leading to purify.
Right. Yeah, God planned it kind of that way because He knew what they were going to do, and He worked it out to His glory. Okay, but we got the same thing going on in a whole lot of other areas as well. Is we are so ready to jump to conclusions with our human reasoning, and we've talked about a lot of this in respects to the whole get out of the cities message as well, right? It's the same issue, same bottom line issue. Rather than taking what the Word says, we jump to these conclusions and want to run off from there. I say we, not us, but I mean just God's people in general, right? So I'm going to stick super close to what the Word says here. And that's why I can promise that I'm not going to get into some of this foolishness that I've heard on Daniel 11. And I'm not going to tell you stuff I don't know. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. And if you catch me doing it, call me on it, all right? Let's start with the book of Daniel as a whole. How many major prophecies are there in the book of Daniel? And what chapters are there in? We'll just do that real quick.
Chapter 2.
Daniel 2, okay. What's the next one?
7.
Daniel 7.
Daniel 8. Daniel 9.
Does 8 and 9 go together?
8 and 9 go together. Is that it?
11 and 12.
Actually, it starts with 10. What is the subject of the prophecy in Daniel 2?
Great image.
The great image. Yeah, world kingdoms, okay? I'm just going to call it this way, flow of superpowers. Starting with Babylon, ending with God's kingdom. What's the subject of the prophecy in Daniel 7?
Same thing.
Okay, can I just do ditto marks, right? Same thing.
Except for the more delineation of the fourth power.
Each one has a little more delineation in one area or another area, right? Okay, what about Daniel 8 and 9?
More about the beast power.
Same thing again, with even more delineation yet. But Daniel 8 starts with what kingdom rather than Babylon? Starts with Persia. Okay? I hope you're familiar enough with these prophecies that we don't have to go back and look at them. I mean, please do this on your own if I hit anything that you're not familiar with. Daniel 8, what is there? What's the first beast in Daniel 8? The ram, and then the goat. And what happens to the goat?
He's broken.
Yeah, there's one horn it starts out with, which we understand to be Alexander the Great, fits history perfectly. That horn is broken, and in its place come up 4 kingdoms, okay? Which is exactly what happened to Alexander's kingdoms. And then out of one of those, what happened? Out of one of those horns, what happened?
A little horn.
A little horn grows out of one of those. Now I find it interesting that going back here, I'm going to go ahead and write them out because we need them. Okay, Babylon. And I'm just going to put Persia for simplicity, rather than Medo-Persia. I mean, the world knows it as Persia, and that was the one that was bigger, and that was prophesied anyway. Then Greece, and Rome, and then God's kingdom. Oops. When Persia conquered Babylon, how did that happen?
The gate was left open.
Yeah, the gates were left open. But and what happened just a couple days before that time?
Well, the river was diverted.
Okay, check the history on this. Basically, there was two battles. There was a battle up in the northern part of the country. The Babylonians lost. And why would they party when they just lost the battle? Craziness. Okay, yeah, interesting stuff there. I'm not going to get into that, but basically, and then there was a time when Babylon fell. So, I mean, that really wasn't a battle, but they still conquered the city and a bunch of people died. So we'll call it a battle. Two major battles. We've just switched from Babylon to Persia. Okay, when Alexander comes against Persia, same thing again, like one major battle and the kingdom is switched. Okay? When Rome takes over from Greece, though, what happened? Okay, it's not the same pattern.
Didn't Greece just kind of decay?
Well, Greece kind of decayed, but Greece was into four kingdoms, right? And actually one of those got absorbed by the other one, so by the time the Romans come along, there's three. Rome didn't become the superpower by just conquering Greece, okay? It took a period of, I'd say, at least 150 years, Rome conquering area after area after area after area before they become, okay? And that was prophesied in this, where it talks about, you know, here, this beast comes up, and then another beast comes up, another beast comes up, right? In this one here, Daniel 8 and 9, this little horn is growing, and it grew. Okay, as Rome grew and spread out its influence and gradually conquered the Greek world and a bit more. Okay, so there's a difference, and that figures into stuff. But basically, this is following the same pattern. You know, little different delineations, a little more information here and there, and so on. Daniel 9 is how the Jewish history fits into all of that. Daniel 10 and 11. What's the subject matter there? So I'm just going to do ditto points here, okay? What's the subject matter there? Open your Bibles to Daniel 10. Okay, yeah, it starts with the vision of Christ, but so did one of the other ones. Like Daniel 9 started out with that same kind of thing. Let's look at verse 20. We're kind of jumping into the middle here, just for the sake of simplicity, or not taking up time. Verse 20, then he said, this is the angel, do you know why I've come to you and how I must return to fight with the prince of Persia? So like this is happening during the Persian period. But I will tell you Prince of Persia, and when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of who? Greece will come. But I tell you what is noted in the scripture, no one upholds me against these except Michael the prince. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up, confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all by his strength, and through his realm he will stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has risen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. So, yeah, this one starts out with Persia and Greece. So this one here is starting out with Persia, again, because Babylon's already passed off the scene. Okay, and so even this one starts with Babylon, and even this one is still given within the Babylonian period. Babylon's already in decay and starting to pass off the scene, and so it just picks up with Persia and doesn't waste time with Babylon. Okay, and then it goes into Greece, and Greece splitting up into 4. And from then on, it's this thing about the king of the north. Versus the king of the south. Is everybody following me so far? My point here, the main point here, is all 4 of Daniel's prophecies are covering essentially the same ground. And not too long ago, I read something written by James White and he was saying that same thing. Okay? Interesting thing is the reason he was saying that because people were, this down here to Rome ends up where? Rome. I'm going to back up and say something I said earlier. Why does it quit with Rome? Why doesn't it go on to talk about the Arabian Empire and the Spanish Empire and the British Empire and so on?
Because they were the world dominating kingdoms.
What?
World dominating kingdoms.
They were not.
They weren't.
At the time, Spain was. In fact, Spain covered more territory than Rome did. Same thing with the British Empire.
But they weren't spiritually world dominating.
I think there's even a better answer.
Well, Rome was the main persecuting power for so many years.
Oh, Spain persecuted big time.
But Spain was a growth of Rome.
Right, who was the power behind Spain?
Well, that was the 10 kingdoms.
Rome was the power behind Spain's
Okay,
persecution.
let me, go ahead,
The
Debbie.
iron never disappeared. The iron's always there.
Yeah.
Ever since, this is the quick and easy way to show somebody that the papacy is the beast, okay? And I usually do this from Revelation 13. Ever since the 2nd century BC, okay, Rome has been a major player in world politics. Okay, it's changed. It started out as the Roman Republic. It morphed into the Roman Empire, which morphed into the papacy, okay, but it's always still Rome. And it's interesting that in Revelation it's called that great city, pointing us to the city more than a particular empire. It's that city. Rome is still Rome. And Rome's been around ever since the 2nd century, except for that time with about 150 years or so when the deadly wound, and then even that was prophesied, right? And that wound's been healed, and so we know we're way down here at the end now from a lot of that. So, the reason James White was pointing this out is because there were people, this was during the time that the deadly wound was wounded, right? I mean, the papacy was so a non-player that a lot of our Adventist people, Uriah Smith almost being the foremost, and people consider him to be a pioneer. I don't, for whatever that's worth, because he wasn't converted until later. You know, the process we talked about, the people sitting down and praying stuff out. The pioneers did that. Uriah Smith came along later. I'm not trying to badmouth Uriah Smith. I think he did a great work. But he led us collectively astray in one big area, and we're still suffering from that. And that's what I'm talking about right now. Because the papacy was such a non-anything at that point, it was a deadly wound. And so people are starting to look elsewhere for fulfillment for the end time prophecies than the papacy, because the papacy was so much out of the picture. And that's where this whole stuff about the Muslims came in. And what James White was doing with this is saying, wait a minute, you know, all of these prophecies, and the only place you can start plugging Muslims in is down here in Daniel 11.
Didn't Ellen White say that Uriah Smith's view on the King of the North was not correct?
I would love to have that quote. But anyway, James White was saying, look, all of these prophecies follow the same pattern. Do we suddenly then take this last one and make the King of the North be somebody totally different? You know, that's totally out of sequence. Okay? So, if we understand the King of the North to be the papacy, at least at the end, the King of the North starts out being part of Greece. It morphs into Rome, which morphs into the papacy, okay? In the same way that from going from Greece to Rome, things gradually happened, as opposed to these earlier one or two battles and it's a done deal. Okay? Things gradually happen from here on out. Again, stuff's gradually changing. And so the King of the North is the papacy, because Daniel's being consistent with himself. Go to verse 37. And I think what Uriah Smith has on the earlier part of Daniel 11 is pretty good. He shows how all of this stuff fits in with what happened in history. But from about verse 27 on, I beg to differ with him. Notice it says here, both of these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil. They shall speak lies at the same table. I know that's happened more than once.
What verse are you on?
Verse 27. But it shall not prosper. And the reason we're reading this verse is, what does it say next? For the end will still be when?
At the time appointed.
At the appointed time. What is that? The appointed time. What is that a direct reference to? Does anybody know? What? I'm sorry.
Habakkuk?
Habakkuk talks about it, probably. I'd be surprised if he didn't. The appointed time. That phrase, the appointed time, is a direct reference to the Jewish feasts. Okay? Now don't misunderstand me. I don't consider myself to be a feast keeper. I have no idea where you all are on that one. Okay? But they do make more sense than some of the pagan holidays that we typically celebrate. I'll just say that much. I have spoken at several feast keeper events. I mean, somebody wants me to come and talk, I'll go talk to them. All right? But I don't consider myself a feast keeper, okay? Just for whatever that's worth. All right? But this phrase, at the appointed time, the end is going to come at the appointed time. Okay, that phrase, the appointed time, it's the word, the Hebrew word I believe is moen. And that's a reference to the feast. So, It's in first chapter of Great Controversy. The Jews, the Romans came and surrounded the city when? This was in the fall of 66. What feast is in the fall?
Atonement, tabernacle.
Tabernacles. The Romans came at the Feast of Tabernacles.
Right after Day of Atonement.
Yes. Real interesting symbolism there. Right after the Day of Atonement. Yeah. So that was their last chance, you know? Yeah. Okay, when did the Romans come back? In the spring of 70. Okay, at Passover time. So the end came at the appointed time. Okay, for this parallel. Now I've tried to see if it fits here and it doesn't quite. And I'm not sure what the significance is there. But here we have, we like to say that all of that stuff was done away with at the cross. But here is a post-cross obvious, there's still some significance there. Okay, again, 1844, October 22. Why did they choose October 22? Because that was the Day of Atonement in that year. Okay, the end being at the appointed time. Interesting stuff here. Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to just give you some scriptural information here. Okay. Let's skip to verse 29. What's the first phrase in verse 29? At the appointed time. And I'm just going to leave it at that right now. You know enough information to know what that could possibly mean. At the appointed time, he, this is the king of the north, if you follow the sequence here and just look at what it does, he shall return and go towards the south. So it's the king of the north, okay, that's going towards the south. But and all of their going at each other, what was going on before? All these other times when the king of the north and the king of the south were going at each other. What was happening?
Something different.
It's an obvious answer to the question. I'm not looking for something real deep or profound or way off somewhere off. When the king of the north and south are going at each other, so we use that still phrases. These guys are going at each other. What are we talking about? What? Fighting. Yeah, wars. Okay, so if the king of the north, at the appointed time, he, which is the king of the north, shall return, they've been going at each other back and forth, he's returning again, shall return and go towards the south. So it's some kind of military conflict again. But it shall not be like the former. It's not going to turn out like it did at the other times, or the latter. It's not going to turn out like it did in another time yet to come. For the ships of what? Ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in a rage against the holy covenant and do damage. He shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifice and place there what? The abomination of desolation. And then it goes on with some stuff that's real similar to what Jesus said in Matthew 24. Okay, going back to Daniel 11, 20, verse 29. What happens in verse 29?
Conflict.
When?
The time appointed.
Okay, so it's at the appointed time. Oh, verse 29. Okay, at the appointed time, what happens? Who? Okay, at the appointed time, the north, I'm just going to use an N to stand for the king of the north, goes against the south. Okay, but this time it's not going to turn out like it did last time or the next time. What happens? And I'm just going 29 onward to bottom of 31. What happens?
It sounds like the king of the north wins.
Read it closer. What happens? He shall go, at the appointed time, the king of the north goes towards the king of the south, okay? And this is military conflict.
Well, it says, verse 30, he shall be grieved in return, so.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, it says, it shall not be as the former time or as the latter time, so therefore this is the middle time. It's not in the former time or the latter time, this is the middle time. This is not time number one, not the first time or the last time, this is the time in between.
Okay, if you look at Daniel 11 as a whole, there was a whole bunch of former times. And there's only one last time. Okay? Yeah, that's worth looking into more.
So this is saying the king of the north is destroyed or hurt, damaged very badly?
What's it say? What happened?
Things that should be grieved.
I'm not going to prime the pump anymore. He's grieved. Why?
Probably because he lost. He usually not.
Because those ships came against
He's
him.
celebrating.
Okay. Ships of Kittim.
Mine says Cyprus or something.
Yeah, mine says Cyprus too. Well, I'll tell you about Kittim in a little bit more. Let's get this sequence out though. Okay, ships of Kittim show up and basically do what? Say you go home. Tell the king of the north to back off, right? And so the king of the north returns. Oops, I need an N in there. King of the north returns. And what happens as he returns? What?
Grieved.
He's grieved. What's another way to say grieved? I'm like, in this context, how would we describe grieved?
Upset.
What?
Upset.
Upset, big time, all right?
Man,
Says enraged.
man.
And then what happens?
More war against God's people.
More and more against God's people. Okay? And as a result of this, takes action against I'm going to just say the Holy Covenant.
So this sanctuary that's being polluted would be the heavenly sanctuary? The ministry of Jesus in the most holy place, and he's polluting that.
Must be, because that's the only one that's around. And what else? I'm trying to generalize here as much as possible, but there's some key points that we can't overlook.
Well, he goes and leads those who are against it.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll include that in taking action against the Holy Covenant.
Takes away the daily sacrifice.
We're getting closer, except I'm not going to deal with the daily. I can get in trouble real fast playing with that one, so I'm just going to leave it alone. And I mean, Ellen White almost says to do that. So,
The abomination of desolation.
okay, and sets. Okay, sets. Sets up the abomination of desolation. Now, what do we know the abomination of desolation to be?
Sunday law. National.
Okay, yeah. And so from otherwise, we know that this begins time of trouble and close of probation, etc. Do you see how this is, and then there's more stuff that follows, right? And so I'm focusing on just this part of the sequence just for the sake of time. I mean, I'm going to talk about some of the other stuff in a bit, and if I don't, remind me. Be real honest with you. I have not found anything in the writings of the pioneers. I mean, I've not had an opportunity to do an exhaustive search. Okay? But in Uriah Smith's book, he doesn't really mention anything about what this might be. But all of our people are attributing, I'll go ahead and say what I'm going to say about what comes next, are attributing all of these verses to what happened in connection with the Dark Ages parallel. And saying, this has already happened, therefore, and it's a parallel, right? So it's going to apply to what happened back then, but therefore our people are looking to verses 40 and onward as to yet future. And so almost everything that I hear about Daniel 11 is simply 40 and onward. Nobody's backing up. But what's really interesting, and I don't have those quotes here with me, I should have ran over and got my computer. Look up Daniel 11 in Ellen White's quotes. There's only about 3 or 4 of them. Okay? There's only about 3 or 4 of them. There is one, however, the lengthiest one. She points us directly to verse 30 and saying, basically, this is all going to happen again. So yeah, there was an application to this back, we got the parallels, of course. Like we say, Jerusalem was surrounded by armies. Well, in principle, that same thing's going to happen again. Okay? And so she points us to verse 30 and says, this is all going to happen again. There's going to be this power who was grieved and he's going to return and do da-da-da-da-da. And she quotes, like from the middle of verse 30 on down through 36, I believe. And unfortunately, our people are overlooking this. But I think a big part of that is, for the most part, our people don't understand the whole abomination desolation thing. Nobody's saying or doing a whole lot with it. And maybe that's why, is they don't see any end time significance in these verses, and so they just move on and try to plug in stuff from verse 40 on.
It says that there's only 8 places where she comments on Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say at least probably half of those are, where you have the same quote in 2 different places. Because I did a collection and I only came up with like 3 or 4.
So it would make sense that the king of the north would be the papacy. So who is the king of the south?
Let me back you up one. But let's get this sequence clearly in our heads before we go any more, though, okay? So at the appointed time, we can probably expect something to happen along with one of the feast times. Now, I'm not going to even guess which one it might be or whatever, except as Debbie noted, it's interesting that a lot of stuff happens in the spring or in the fall. Okay? There is a military, I'm going to say, going towards. Sounds to me like some kind of an invasion. I'm just going to put this in my own words, and if you see something different, please let me know. But I'm going to say, the king of the north invades the king of the south. or at least plans to invade, but the ships of Kittim show up and say, back off. And so the king of the north returns, all upset, and as a result of this upsetness, there's this action against the Holy Covenant, which the abomination of desolation is a part of, and the Sunday law gets set up as a result. Go ahead.
I don't know how much you have been listening to any news, but in October of this year, the Pope is going to have a forum, a worldwide forum, in which he is going to encourage clasping of hands and making Sunday a day of rest in October.
So you're going back to the appointed times thing with that. There might be something in connection with that. I don't know. Okay, let's take apart some of these symbols. Go ahead.
Is it possible that ships are talking about the United States and Donald Trump?
Let's be careful we don't jump to conclusions. All right, now I appreciate what you're saying so that I could say that. Okay, let's be real careful here what we do. Who's the king of the north? Okay, I think there's no question about that with anybody. Okay, the king of the north is the papacy. Who's the king of the south? Good question. We'll come back to that maybe. But let's go back again. We can learn a lot from these. Let's go back to the Dark Ages parallel when the papacy ruled supreme, okay? When the papacy wanted to do something militarily, who actually did it? In other words, does the papacy have its own army? No. I mean, other than the Swiss Guards, but they're not really an army, right? So when the papacy wanted to go after the Waldenses, let's say, who was actually going after them? What?
Probably Italy army.
Yeah, the Duke of Savoy, that was the Italian province there, or the King of France. I mean, just looking at those Waldense stories, I know. So when the papacy wants to do something militarily, it's not the papacy itself that does that, it's the papal allies that do that, or the ones that have subjected themselves to the papacy. Ready for the next one? Who's the main papal ally in the end times?
The U.S.
Right out of Revelation 13. Duh. Okay? So who is the king of the north going, symbolized here as militarily going after the king of the south? Probably, most likely. It's more likely the U.S. that is going to do the invading, because the U.S. is the main papal ally here in the end times. And the U.S. is the one that sets up the abomination of desolation anyway. So who's the king of the south? What area of the world did the South originally stand for? Like when the Grecian Empire split up and it first became the north, the north, south, east, west kingdoms, the South was which geographical area? Egypt. Scripturally, what does Egypt stand for?
France.
Scripturally, what? Atheism.
That originated.
Are there atheistic countries around the world today? That there's a potential conflict with the U.S. militarily.
Communism?
What?
Communism?
I think what I've shared so far, I am sure of. Okay, going any farther than this, we're getting into the area of speculation. And so I'm a little reluctant to speculate. However, let me run through things here again just so we're really clear on what we do have. Okay? We know the King of the North stands for the papacy. We know the U.S. is the main papal ally in the end times. We know the U.S. is the one that sets up the abomination of desolation. So those two are going to be working together. We know that in the Dark Ages time period, when the papacy wanted to go against somebody, take military action against some group, it was the papal allies that actually went and did it. So when it talks about the King of the North going against the King of the South, militarily, we can expect that the U.S. is probably the one that's going to do that. The King of the South, okay, Egypt, which stands for atheism. And there are atheistic countries around the world today that we have a potential military conflict between the U.S. and those countries. And just for the record, not for the record, just for you all, I'm watching North Korea very closely. When this invasion happens, or a threatened invasion, this could only be a threatened invasion. Okay, these ships of Kittim show up. Not sure who the ships of Kittim are, to be honest with you. What I do know is Kittim, look at a map. The word Kittim refers to the east coastlands to the west of Israel. Some versions even say Cyprus.
Yeah, it says anything, a general term for all islanders of the Mediterranean Sea and descendants of Javan or Japheth, the grandsons of Noah.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, let me see that. Is this Strong's Concordance?
Yeah, on your phone they have an app that you can get every word that's highlighted.
I'm going to borrow this. So this is from Strong's?
Yeah.
Okay, it says a general term for all the islanders of the Mediterranean Sea. And you look at the Mediterranean islands, most of them are in which area? Greece. Okay, most of the islands in the Mediterranean are Greek islands. Okay, like some of them, like Cyprus and Crete, are their own thing. But anyway, that's the first one. The second one is the descendants of Javan, or Javan, the son of Japheth and the grandson of Noah. Javan is referring to the Greeks as well.
And then it says,
Yeah, some of the versions put Cyprus in there. I have anything that I can get a hold of to like sort out ships of Kittim. Okay, my ears are perking up. There's a real interesting verse in Balaam's prophecy. Remember Balak, king of Moab, took him up on the mountain, tried to get him to curse Israel. He wouldn't curse Israel. And instead he offers these flowing prophecies about Jacob. Anyway, in those, there's this one verse that says something about, who's going to be able to stand when the ships of Kittim do their thing. I mean, I'm overphrasing, or paraphrasing a whole lot there. But anyway, it's Numbers 24:24, if I remember right. But anyway, I mean, it doesn't add a whole lot, but it says, it adds significance to this time. Because it's the time of the abomination of desolation. It's like, who's going to be able to deal with this one? Kind of underlining the significance of it, but it doesn't give us clues about that. One of the things I did find in one of the concordances about Kittim, it referred to Alexander the Great as the king of the Kittim. Okay? So this could have some connection with something on the European mainland. I don't know. But anyway, because these ships show up and tell the U.S. to back off from this invasion wherever it happens, the U.S. returns and they're all upset. I want to reference you back to 9/11. Most of you are old enough to see what happened. You saw how the attitude of the nation changed overnight. And we were upset. And as a result, we went and invaded, right? We were able to vent our wrath on somebody else. And so I'm thinking, okay, here, we don't just invade somebody for no reason. Okay, there's going to be a reason why this happens, And we're going to be told to back off, and yeah, we're going to return all upset, and all of that anger, instead of being able to vent that anger on somebody else, that's going to get turned internally. And then the Sunday law is going to pop out of that one. Again, going back to the Christian Jews, or the Christians living in Jerusalem at the time, they didn't know how that prophecy was going to be fulfilled, but they knew what the prophecy was. And when the Jews revolted in the spring of AD 66, it was obvious. You know, this may very well be something like that. Like right now, we're like, what does this stand for? What is this? How's this going to work out? We don't know. But when this happens, like, it'll be obvious. Okay? What I'm just looking, what I expect to see, again, I may be wrong on this one. Like I said, I'm getting into the area of speculation here just a little bit. Since it's at the appointed time, I expect the U.S. to make some invasion in connection with one of the feast days. Somebody's going to show up that can be called the ships of Kittim and make us back off. When that happens, here we are. We're heading for it. And I don't know how long this is going to take. Maybe this is going to take a half a year, just like the Christians back then had. Maybe it's going to be a shorter time. I don't know. But if the parallel follows, this could take possibly up to half a year, which would give us a warning. And those of us who know and recognize the prophecy and what's going on, it'd be really nice to have like a 6 months warning that the Sunday law was going to get set up. Again, I don't know if it's going to be 6 months or less. I mean, I could see this happening really fast. So maybe we won't have 6 months, because God's already given us over 170 years.
Although if we have 6 months, our flight will be in the winter.
Well, yeah, we'll be able to take off before winter or whatever, you know. Now again, where do we flee at the abomination of desolation? Where do we flee at the Sunday law? Out of the cities into the country. This isn't the flight to the most desolate and solitary places. I'm worried that a lot of our people are going to take off to the wilderness when the Sunday law hits. Well, but they're not where they can do any good, because probation hasn't closed yet. There's still evangelism to do. The most important thing is that you go where God sends you.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, your place in His plan is going to be the safest place for you. If I decide, based on my own wisdom, that the U.S. is going to be get worse persecution, and I choose some other country to go to, but God doesn't want me to go to that other country. I mean, He might use that to get me there, right? But maybe not. But chances are that type of thinking is selfish thinking, right? I'm worried about saving my own skin, okay? I'm not worried about where can I do the most ministry. Okay? And so I've just stepped outside of God's plan. It's like there is no place on earth that is safe enough for you if you've stepped outside of God's plan. So, when you're choosing a place to go, the most important thing is to go where God wants you to be.
Years ago, we used to sing a song that said, "Must I be carried to the skies in flowery beds of ease, while others fought to bring the fires and save that stormy sea." We have come to a place where we're not like Paul, that even though he knew he was going to die in Jerusalem, he went.
Yeah, because he knew that was God's plan.
Right. So we have to have the same mentality.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. The faith of Jesus.
Some people might think, well, how do you know God's plan? I know there's a lot of people that might be listening to the video. I used to think that, how do you know? But what I've come to find is that the more you pray, and if you pray hours a day, or you make sure you keep your relationship with God, He will tell you His plan. You don't have to worry.
And right up there with praying, I'm going to say study the Word, okay? Because it's in the Word that you learn to recognize His voice. Because I've seen how some prayer ministries have gone, and they focus on praying so much. Praying can become a very selfish, motivated thing. And so we need to spend, I would say, equal, if not more time in the Word. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying don't pray. We gotta pray. All right? I mean, I've been like praying nonstop since I've been here, just because I don't have my regular prayer time, and study time. But we've got to get into the Word so that we recognize God's voice. And I would almost suspect that a lot of the reason, I know in my own life this has been true, that's why I can say this from my own perspective. When I was having the most difficulty recognizing God's leading was before I got into the Word enough to recognize God's voice. And so it's just really important to be into the Word and not jump to our own conclusions like we talked about earlier.